Hello, my name is Mike, and this is a bike. Now, I've watched previous episodes, and specifically the series I made about converting a Kawasaki LTD 440 street bike into an off-road adventure dual sport. You'll notice that I threw a whole bunch of the wrong parts at this bike and somehow managed to get them to work. So we're going to continue to do that to make this more and more functional off-road than on. One of the nice things about eBay and Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace is, well, a lot of times you can look at a whole bunch of the wrong parts and throw your eyeball on them and go, hey, I wonder if I can make that part fit. You can ask the seller a question. Sometimes you can get dimensions, things like that, and you can get some wrong parts and make them fit, or at least get them where you can maybe make them fit. Anyway, in this episode, I'm going to do that. Got to looking on eBay and bought this wrong part. This is for an entirely different model of Kawasaki. This is for an EN454 or something like that. It's from a much later model year, but one of the things I noticed about it was that, well, the pulley offset was about the same, and the diameter of the cush drive was about the same. So this may actually fit into the back wheel on this bike. Now you might be asking yourself, why would you put a different type of pulley on the bike when the pulley that's on it works just fine? You're not asking yourself that? Well, maybe you're asking yourself, why did I waste money buying a part we don't even know will fit? That's a better question, huh? Well, here's the thing. This particular pulley has 2 more teeth on it than that pulley, which means it's a slightly lower gear ratio. And a little bit lower gear ratio would give us a little bit better climbing torque on an off-road bike. So I took a gamble, took some eyeball measurements, and we're going to see if this pulley will actually fit on this bike. We'll see if our belt is long enough. I may have to get a different belt. And then we're going to come up with some kind of a belt guard because, well, belts aren't exactly the best propulsion system for off-road vehicles. A little pebble or rock gets caught in there and could throw your belt off or break your belt, something like that. So we're going to fabricate something to protect that. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take this windshield, which is of course the wrong one. This is made for a Victory motorcycle, and I'm going to see if I can adapt it to fit the incredibly cheap Japanese fairing assembly that no longer has working headlights in it. Yeah, I got another headlight ordered for it. Anyway, we're going to try and make this windshield fit on here as well. And then I'm going to visit one of my local exhaust shops and see if they can't bring that exhaust around to one side, get it up off the frame, give us that much more ground clearance. So stick around.
Somewhere in a dusty, dirty back alley in western Arizona, not far from historic Route 66, is an old fart trying to cram a square peg into a round hole. He'll work on anything, just as long as it's got at least 2 cool wheels.
easier than expected, fit on there pretty darn well. And the good news is I didn't have to replace the belt, but it just barely fits. Now the original pulley had the wheel centered up on like the third or fourth mark, but with this one, well, it's almost all the way forward. So if it had been any bigger, I might not have been able to use that belt. Now it spins fine, but well, seems to be rubbing somewhere. And I got to looking, and well, it's rubbing right here, just barely, just this little lip here. You could take a grinder to it, but it's completely unnecessary because you see, as I ride, it will self-clearance. You know, it'll kind of wear away here, and just kind of between the two, it'll eventually stop rubbing. So that's good. Anyway, now let's see what we can do about that windshield. That actually worked out pretty well. You know, I wasn't going to put this chrome thingy on here because, well, you don't really need chrome on an off-road bike. And besides, it says Victory on it. And, well, I guess not too many people would be confused with this thing with a Victory. It doesn't look a whole lot like a Victory. But nonetheless, I decided that, well, this is such shitty, cheap plastic that you probably want as much reinforcement as you can get. It's still pretty wobbly. I mean, but it should suffice. Well, look what came in the mail today. That makes it official. Hello. Well, we haven't got a whole lot finished on this thing because, well, we're still waiting on parts. It's been several days. Some of my parts got shipped to the wrong address. I mean, all kinds of things happen. One part that did arrive is this thing. This is a belt guard from a Harley Davidson. It's a Super Glide, Mega Glide, Wonder Glide, whatever. I don't really care what model it was. What I do care about is the appearance of it. So I kind of eyeballed it on eBay, and I noticed that the overall shape looks like it would be just about right to work on this bike. So I'm going to find out. I'm going to see if it'll fit up in there. There is a little bit of a belt guard down there. It's not very effective. This would be much better if I could get it in place. But I've got to remove the exhaust and the center stand to be able to install this. And I got to remove the exhaust anyway because, well, I want to get it up off the bottom of the frame rails. I want to reroute it around the middle of the bike somewhere. Now, I did go to one of the local muffler shops, and he came out and he looked at it and he scratched his head and he looked at the curves and he said, well, we need a jig that does a this bend and a that bend, and it's going to cost you $1,000. $1,000? The bike's not even worth $200 or $300 or something. So that doesn't make sense. And of course, well, I'm a cheapskate. I'm not spending $1,000 on a bike that's not even worth that much. So I got to thinking, why reinvent the wheel? You see, if you look at a Honda Scrambler CL350 of about the same era, you'll see that the exhaust ports are almost exactly the same as this bike, and they exit higher and they both come over to one side. And I thought, well, I'll just get myself a cheap used Honda Scrambler exhaust because I can modify it and tweak it a little bit and make it work. And it won't cost me $1,000 like a custom exhaust would. Right? Right? Well, guess what? Just try to find a Honda Scrambler CL350 exhaust system at a reasonable price. Ain't gonna happen. All the exhausts on eBay were anywhere from $600 to $1,200 for two little tubes. I was like, are you kidding me? So that's also out of the picture. So what I've decided to do instead is try my hand at building my own custom exhaust. Now, before you start laughing, I'm only going to use the booger welds to spot weld little angular pieces together, and then once I get it all kind of tacked into place, I'll take it into the muffler shop and put some real welds on it. I can tack weld it just enough to hold it together to get it to someone who can actually do it correctly. So that's going to be the plan. I've got some 90s, some 45s, a 2-into-1 collector, stuff ordered on eBay, and all total I don't think I spent but $50 on elbow parts. And we'll just hack up the existing exhaust, tack it all together, and see if we can't make a usable exhaust. So I'm going to go ahead and take the exhaust off. I'll probably take the center stand off. We'll try to get that belt guide to work, and then we'll start cutting up that exhaust and see what we can build. So let me show you how it turned out. It actually turned out pretty good. It was the right shape to begin with, which helps a lot. So what I did is I used the hot knife method and I cut a notch so that the original bracket could protrude through the plastic, and then I just put a bolt in from behind. Then at the front to secure it, I don't know if you can see, I cut a little hole so I could get in there with a tool, and I used a self-tapper into the swing arm to hold the front. And I checked it, I rolled it, and it does not rub. The belt does not rub. And as you can see, it blocks any debris from getting in between the belt and the pulley, at least on this side. Now looking at it from the other side, well, the belt's still a little bit open there, but if I configure a skid plate, which I want to do, I want to make sure that the skid plate comes all the way back here to close off this area here so debris can't get on top of the belt from this side. So, belt guard accomplished. Yay! Now we'll move on to the exhaust. Well, it doesn't make an awful lot of sense to spend time cutting up my exhaust when I still haven't received the elbows and angles and so forth that I ordered. So we're gonna put the exhaust on a back burner for the time being. What I can do is create a skid plate. I just happen to have this skid plate shaped piece of aluminum. Yeah, what are the odds? This came with a bike I bought years ago, and it was actually, you can tell by the reflector here, this was a thing that a guy put on his luggage rack because he had some kind of aftermarket trunk thingy on it. But it also happens to be about the right dimensions to make an absolutely perfect skid plate for this bike. Now, one of the things I don't want to do is I don't want to drill holes in the frame. That could tend to weaken the frame. So what I need to do is figure out a way where I can attach this using like hose clamps or something. And I think probably the easiest way to do that is to drill a couple of large holes kind of close to each other, and then just put a hose clamp through the holes and around the frame, and we can attach it that way. So that's going to be our next little project. Hopefully by the time that's complete, we'll start to see some more parts flow in, and we'll get that exhaust put together, kind of, sort of, I think. Anyway, skid plate, next up. So let me show you what we ended up with. We now have a skid plate that protects the front of the engine and the bottom of the engine. It also protects my shifter. This shifter was bent pretty bad. I was able to bend it back out, but now it's much less likely to get bent. It's simply held on by hose clamps, as you can see around the frame. Because some of the engine parts protruded below the frame, I had to make some spacers. So if you look, I've got a piece of square tubing in here around this hose clamp. And the square tubing came from the wrong gas tank that was in the Lawn Art Cougar. I had all those leftover spacers and stuff, so I put them to use. And I did have to notch the front a little bit for this, Fetzer valve or whatever the hell it is. So I do have some protection here, and same thing on this side, piece of square tubing to space it out appropriately and protect my engine properly. I did have to slice a little wedge out of it, little cheese wedge here, to make room for my brake pedal. But now my underside of my bike is well protected. At least I think it is. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. I'm still looking at least another week out before the exhaust parts and elbows and stuff arrive. So I'm not even going to try to start on that part of the project because, well, this video is already taking too long. Anyway, come back in the next episode and you'll watch me cobble together an exhaust system that'll probably leak or fall off. But anyway, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and, share with your friends that you hate, your enemies. And share with all your enemies and other people that you don't like. All right, Mike, we're going to call that a wrap. Yeah? Well, hi, little guy. How'd you get here? Well, hey, little fella, what brings you here? What's that? They left you abandoned in a storage locker for 20 years? Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Well, you've come to the right place, little fella. We'll get you back on the road again.